First business, I woke up one day and decided to sell and was gone within a month. She leans over the table to me and says, "What's your background?" And I said, "Sales." And she said, "What? No finance background?" I said, "No." She leans further forward and says, "You're going to struggle, aren't you?" And within 6 months, she was gone, and I was on my way to being one of the top earners in the firm. After spending some thousands of dollars and many weeks with some top four trying to get some advice on how to build a $150 million company and getting nowhere with it, really, Richard showed me on the back of a napkin within a 20-minute meeting as to what it means to build a $150 million business. For 3 years, I found myself saying, I used to own a financial services business, 65 staff and whatnot. It's like, oh, okay. So what do you do now? I did 20 years of 80-hour weeks. My older kids didn't see me in the morning. They very rarely saw me. Duck home for dinner, and I'd shoot back out to evening appointments, and that's what you did. Then all of a sudden,
Today's guest is Greg Munt. Greg is a financial services professional and has built a couple of businesses in this space from a real hustler background, starting a mortgage broking business in his early 20s to selling that in his mid-20s. He's deep in sales, very passionate about how to build a capable sales organisation, really cares about the culture and development of people. Plus, he also overlaps a lot of thinking around systems and processes. He's a charitable-minded individual, and he has a charity. We talk about that to a degree. And so it's a wide-ranging, as always, conversation, very deep insights and some great sharing from Greg. Please do enjoy the conversation today. I'm Josh Comrie. Welcome to the show. Today we have Greg Munt on the show. Greg, welcome.
thank you, Josh.
So your last business was called 150. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, 150 Group. I guess publicly, you'd always be asked what 150 means. And to me internally, and the mission was always build a business worth $150 million. It was always being built to sell. And that was a stretch target, shall we say. And but publicly, when people ask you, so I quickly realised after some years that I needed to come up with an excuse for why we call 150. And the best one, logically, was Dunbar's number. So Dunbar's number, 150. What does that relate to? It's the number of relationships that you're sort of supposedly able to foster and connect with and so on. So, that was, hey, we're going to deal with 150 clients. We're going to treat them really super well. We're going to help them on their wealth journey. And yeah, that was what it related to.
Yeah, got it.
Publicly.
Yes, yeah, understand that. So the origin was that you intended to build this company for 150 million and then exit. Why that number? That's a very specific number.
Yeah, it was literally, just plucked out of thin air, realistically.
Yeah, okay.
What is enough? When is enough? And what should your goals be? I mean, they should always, always challenge you. I think one of the things that I've always done when we're brainstorming or strategizing in business is going, right, hey, well, we're trying to deal with a certain problem. Let's put another decimal place on that. And now what are we doing differently? And so I guess having a massive target makes you try and come up with more, I guess, creative ways to deliver and, different set of thinking, right? The classic Grant Cardone 10X, right?
Yes, yeah. And do you find as an individual that is inspiring and motivating and occasionally kind of oppressive as a big number? I find when I set super big goals that they can sometimes kind of weigh down on me. What's your stance on that?
Yeah, it's I guess it's always changed over the years. I think we all get goal creep. What's that classic saying that 10 years ago you would wished you could be in this position you're in today, and that's always true, right? You set a goal, an initial number, you meet it, and then it's the classic what's next of somebody like me with ADHD who can't sit still. So scary. I guess it's the balance of probably the balance of trying to push yourself to go very far, and keep pressure on, but at the same time trying not to be depressed because you're so far off where your goals that you set, right?
Yeah. How do you do that? Is it an intentioned practice, or is there like a process?
I struggle with it daily. I still struggle with it daily.
Yeah.
And what's that line? Envy is the thief of...
Oh, comparison's the thief of joy.
Comparison is the thief of joy.
Eleanor Roosevelt has been attributed to.
Brilliant line. If I could embrace that in my life every morning, I think I'd live a happier life at the moment. Yeah.
Let's go back. Greg, introduce yourself to the audience and the listeners, please.
High school dropout, 19 years old. I sold my Nissan Skyline and put my deposit on my first residential property here in Auckland. So I've been 46 years old now. I've been investing in property for 27 years. That started me on a journey. In 19 I bought one, 20 I bought another, 21 I bought another one. Still living at home with mum and dad. Dad's starting to get a bit grumpy because I own 3 houses and still living at home paying bugger all rent. And then stumbled into finance by default, actually. So I'd always been in sales roles. Stumbled into finance when I've run out of income to be able to service that property number 4. So I got declined on a mortgage, and I was dealing with a mortgage broker at the time, and I thought I should be a mortgage broker. I like property. I like this numbers thing. So quit my job, sold one of my houses, put a year's worth of money in the bank, and thought, right, if we get to the end of the year, if I haven't made it, I'll go and get a job. And that was where the journey began. That quickly led to learning the mortgage broking career.
Yeah, how did you build your business in the mortgage broking space?
Outright grind. As a 22-year-old kid who looked like he was about 17, dealing with people's largest investment being their home loan was a little bit of a challenge in the early days. So I really grounded out as a salesperson. I started work for a company which was one of the largest in New Zealand at the time to learn the trade, and I quickly realised that if I was the first person in the office and the phone rang in the morning, then I would get that lead. So I was always the first person in the office. I also there was a lady there, Kim, who was in charge of the phones a lot, and I realised that Kim had a certain treat that she liked from Baker's Delight. So pretty much daily I'd buy Kim that treat, and I was probably the beneficiary of some phone calls that I shouldn't have got. So, hey, between that and literally outright knocking on doors, so, identify your market, you're trying to sell a product is a home loan. Where am I going to find people who want a home loan? People that are selling their houses. Where do I find people who are selling their houses? At the time, back in print media days, there was this thing called the Property Press, which was printed every week, had a list of 300 to 400 open homes on the North Shore where I was living at the time. And so I'd pick up my Property Press, I would look at all the addresses in there, look at the new listings, find the 50 or 60 that had come to the market, and I would just happen to be dropping by in the area that evening or the following day, and I'd be knocking on those doors, and I'd be literally saying, hey, look, I'm a mortgage broker. I was just up the road seeing a client. Of course I wasn't, because I didn't have any. I noticed you're selling your house. You're probably buying. You probably need a mortgage. Can I help you? So, and
that was quite disarming, I'd imagine, for people, because you kind of turn up offering to help an individual as opposed to asking for necessarily their business.
Yeah, but once you get started and once you get talking to people and you show that you've got that skill and advice, that's quickly you quickly have that credibility there. So
I'm going to scratch on a couple of these things here because we have some folk that are entrepreneurs that watch the show. So we're founders, owners, and entrepreneurs that are the audience. And so for those folk, I've long believed that one of the core competencies that you really should have to some degree as a founder of a company is sales skills. And you might be a product person, you might be an engineer, but if you can't sell your ideas, because selling is just influence, right? If you cannot influence other people about ideologies, about approaches, about investment, then you're going to be dead in the water all day, every day from people that have those skills will run circles around you. So I'm just going to talk about a couple of these things here because I think it's worth saying. You worked the numbers hard, so you went out and you hustled, you hit the street literally and knocked on doors. You were clear about your ICP, your ideal customer profile, so you understood that it was going to be people that were in the market at that point in time. And over time that evolved into being property investors. So you realised that your homies were people that were like you, that had your way of thinking and looking at the world. And then you had some kind of techniques which enabled you to appear to be more experienced or older or whatever it might be than what you were, which was the costume, if you like, which is what you put on as well. Did I miss anything there about that early kind of success that you experienced?
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, okay. So you did the mortgage broking thing for a period of time. Did you have any noteworthy noteworthy achievements that happened for you early on in your career there?
Within 6 months, I'd realised that if I could create opportunity, I didn't actually need to do the work. Sales generation or opportunities, and there was 90% of the role with the mortgage broker career is the back office stuff. So within 6 months, I'd hired a full-time PA, and I was only the second person within that organisation that had a full-time PA. And so within 18 months, I was duking it out, number one, number two earner in the business. Coming from no experience whatsoever. So, just understanding that, I guess, for me, a lifetime of, and I still think this to the day, if you can create a sale, create an opportunity, you can always find somebody to deliver that work behind the scenes. So, yeah.
And you also understood leverage as well, because your time was much more valuable than the administration, because I understand that mortgage broking is quite heavy on the administration, documentation and things to fill out.
Absolutely.
The thing that I missed before, by the way, is you fostered an environment that you were the beneficiary of nepotism. So nepotism is favouring others. Typically it's family, but it might be others or friends as well. And so nepotism is really annoying if you don't have it, but it's great if you do have it. And so buying the cream bun or whatever it was for the colleague that you had in the office that was responsible for distributing leads, that's a smart play. It's a smart play. So, sorry, I interrupted you. So go on.
No, that's good. Hey, look, another notable thing from just really focusing on that lack of experience and what is actually valuable in a business is the day I started at that firm, there was another lady who was also starting. She was 20 plus years my senior. She had a 20 plus year banking history. And we're sitting in the boardroom, we're about to be onboarded. She leans over the table to me and says, "What's your background?" And I said, "Sales." And she said, "What? No finance background?" I said, "No." She leans further forward and says, "You're going to struggle, aren't you?" And within 6 months, she was gone, and I was on my way to being one of the top earners in the firm. So it just really reinforced the fact that if you can deal with people, you can understand where an opportunity is and create an opportunity. Then with scale and leverage and the right team around you, you can succeed in whatever industry you want. Right?
So you left that firm to start your own first company?
Yeah, I did. I did. So very quickly realised that the imbalance of revenue share was not in my favour. Would have been if I was a mid-pack earner, but because I was sort of going above and beyond, it made sense to do my own thing. So at the time, low barriers to entry, literally worked from the home office. I packed up sticks one day, took my PA, and off we went. And quickly grew a company, which we grew. Had 3 offices: Epsom, Takapuna, and a JV with a real estate agency up in Albany. And quickly grew that and sold that business. Actually,
okay.
I don't remember why I sold. It turned out to be opportune time. It was 2007, just before GFC, and so timing couldn't have been better. Those businesses halved in values in the following couple of years. So that was
you would have
business
been
number one.
In your 20s still?
26.
26, yeah, wow, okay. So you'd built
27 maybe.
3-branch office. Mortgage broking was taking off. It was going ballistic during those early noughties, 20-odd years ago.
Yeah, those are good timing. Good times.
Yeah, right. Timing was exceptional to get into that space. So quickly talk us through the exit that you had for that first business. Who was the buyer and how did it come about?
Actually, just remember one of those things. It was quite funny. They were buying me because they wanted the book. You built up a passive revenue book, so that was your saleable asset. You sold at a multiplier of whatever your trail revenue was, but also because they had a bit of infrastructure and built relationships. So quickly realised relationships and scale. So the multi-offices, the couple of JV businesses, which fed leads in, and that was what was valuable. I remember they were buying it for the son. It was this sort of a financial services business that they owned. They hadn't really cracked the mortgage broking business. The son was trying to do that. So our acquisition was a quick scale for them by us, by the team. And so I remember the day, actually, he came to my office to do some DD. And he came in and he said, "Right, show me how this business operates." And I literally picked up a file off my main PA at the time. I picked up a file off her desk. I said, "I go to a client, I meet with them, I get them to fill out this form, or sometimes I don't, and then I go, here, and I handed it over.
I love the reductive nature of it. We know that businesses are a little bit more complex than that, but at its very core, that's essentially what you do. Find someone that needs the product, the service that you have, and then move the paper around and then kind of build for that experience. Just wanted to touch on something because this is something that I'm unaware of. I suspect others may be as well. So mortgage broking businesses have trail income that's attached to them. How does that work?
Literally, so I'd say, and I'm a little bit off, it's been a few years since I've been involved, but the lenders typically pay an upfront commission based on the size of the loan, and then they, I'd say 50% of them also pay a trail commission, which means you're building up a revenue book. So as long as that loan, as long as you're deemed to be maintaining the relationship with that client, then you continue to earn a monthly or quarterly revenue off the sum of that loan. So,
Okay.
Yeah, so it's the passive income component, albeit you've got some servicing requirements. And,
Yes. So in other words, you write the mortgage, and then provided they stay with that bank and they're a good customer, then there's some trail revenue that comes through.
Yeah, that's right.
Makes sense. Like the way life insurance works. We'll come back to that in a second, by the way. So how does that book get valued? So what's the multiple that gets attached to it?
It's interesting, isn't it? And this is what I've learned over the years. It depends on who you're selling to. When I then went on, built a much larger company and we sold, it was, we'll get to that, different methodology, but fundamentally at a trade sale, you're normally looking at a multiplier somewhere between 2 and 4 times your underlying revenue. For me as a salesperson, I could never justify buying a book because, especially if you look at something like a mortgage book, let's say you're selling it in an underwrite of say 2.5 times revenue. Well, in order to generate that, I mean, I just look at or to pay that back. 2.5 years, if you're paying that back with income, it means there's tax involved. So, immediately scale that up to more like 4 times. And then you've got cost of actually delivering that business. So now you might be up to 5 times, maybe 6 times if you actually truly factor in your cost. All of a sudden, you're out to a 6-year payback. And average lifespan of a mortgage in New Zealand is about 5 years.
Okay.
So, there's reasons to acquire businesses, but then, and I actually went on and acquired a business in my next iteration of my business, but it was in the accounting space for a different purpose. But, that whole revenue times and payback, it's often people are just buying a job, aren't they? Or they might be buying a little bit of a kickstart to get a business going. But as a salesperson, I look at that and go, right, well, I wouldn't ever buy one of those businesses unless you had a mad reason to get to scale fast, just because it's cheaper and it's far more profitable to actually acquire that through sales.
Interesting. So let's move on to the founding of 150 Group.
Sure.
You mentioned you built it to sell. So what was the opportunity you saw, and talk us through the early days? Yeah,
early days, I guess 3-year hiatus in the middle, or 2.5 years, was out, left the residential mortgage broking business and jumped into the commercial property world. So funding, working for a couple of different merchant banking companies, funding property development and business. And so that was a good little experience. And then the depth of the GFC, sort of all of a sudden, all the developers you're funding are bankrupt, or, deals aren't working, or environment's too tough. So basically that market really, really dried up. And I thought, what should I do now? And just come out of my restraint of trade from my mortgage business. So I thought, why not start that again? So I actually partnered with one of my old team members, and we kicked off mortgage broking business. Within 2 months, I think we'd realised the market was completely different to the market that we'd left.
What had
3
changed?
years earlier. Volume, different, I guess, just market conditions. Also the fact that every mortgage broking firm then was getting into the risk insurance space, just because that was where you could create revenue. Even in a down property market, there was revenue to be made off the same client base. So we quickly added within a few months, quickly learnt the insurance business and started the insurance business as well. And that then grew over the following 11 years of that business. We had a mortgage broking business, a life insurance business. My now wife was an insurance lawyer by trade, but she was working at Marsh, one of the corporates, as a high up in the fire and general insurance business. So we quickly bought that in. We set up a new business, built an accounting business, acquired another accounting business, and then built a KiwiSaver and investment advice business. So the collective over the group, there was 6 companies, all dealing with the same client, and ultimately cross-selling all of those services.
You built the company to sell. What decisions did you make early on, factoring in the experience that you'd had from your first business, that made it, in your mind, a saleable asset from the outset?
Good question. The better question would have been, what were the mistakes you made along the way?
We'll get to that.
Because there was lots of those.
Yes.
Hey, I guess I didn't know. Realistically, I didn't know what a valuable company looked like. And to the point that even a number of years in, I engaged with one of the big four accounting firms to provide me some advice. I had this ambition of building a $150 million company. Because, every time I brought a staff member on, I told them the journey we were on and showed them the pathway. And albeit I had the energy to say we were going to be doing this, but I didn't actually know how to get there. After engaging with one of the top four and spending some thousands of dollars to get a report to sort of wasn't very helpful whatsoever. And it wasn't until I had a chance meeting with a fantastic guy who became a shareholder in my business and actually became our chairman for a period of time. It was a guy called Richard Kuhn. And so Richard had a really good career. He's built a little company called Sovereign, which they sold to Commonwealth Bank of Australia, and after some listing, went on to build a $1 billion reverse mortgage business internationally, leading up to GFC, and then kicked back off with Partners Life Insurance with Naomi and his brother Chris, and it's led to a $1 billion exit as well for the team there. So Richard was great. So after spending some thousands of dollars and many weeks with some top four trying to get some advice on how to build a $150 million company and getting nowhere with it really, Richard showed me on the back of a napkin within a 20-minute meeting as to what it means to build a $150 million business. So that was interesting.
What were the key foundations or criteria of that plan as far as you recall?
I guess it's really knowing what you're building, who your acquirer is going to be, and what they're looking for as a value. Like what is actually valuable. I'd sort of gone down a path of licensing. So I'd built a good system, I believed, which was, we had all of these different businesses. And being a salesperson, I was building a business that a salesperson could come in and, I see a salesperson on the checkout at New World, right? Good human. And the amount of people I've recruited from roles like that into financial services, just because you see a good human, you go, I've got the systems and processes and I'm a high school dropout. And, there's this, if you have a good system and you wrap some good support and people around, all you need is really good people who are good at the front end. And, we can talk about recruitment. I had some interesting recruitment strategies over the years too. But I guess the key, I thought, was being able to deliver a business which was scalable. I could, as I was going down a licensing path, so I would license this offering to ultimately a salesperson and get a salesperson in, teach them the industry, and then we could also cross-sell these other services, which are then delivered by each of my professionals in the different areas. I owned a CA practice, as I said, and I'm not an accountant. Bought another CA practice, not an accountant. Don't know, I'm still probably not the best accounting client because I don't understand it enough, but it kind of just shows as long as you have good people and who are professionals in what they do, you can deliver really good outcomes for clients. So anyway, I was going down this licensing path thinking that was the thing, but what Richard pointed out to me quickly was through the licensing or the franchising kind of structure, you're actually giving away the majority of the value, which is what your acquirer is actually looking for. So another pivot, big pivot business structure-wise to then changing what we were doing and the path we were heading in order to build something that actually had a good realisable value and was going to be valuable to an acquirer. So that was a big change, and unfortunately we did have a lot of upset people along the way by way of, we were going down a certain journey and a certain structure. And because of where we were going, we were building some really great people who were leaders in their own right. And then it's almost like pulling the rug out from them as far as, hey, sorry guys, we're changing the structure and we're going this direction now, which, and from their side of things, I guess a big change. So a lot of those guys have gone on and built their own businesses in that same industry, which is something that I'm really proud of. And we've grown some great people over the years, but it was a bit disruptive going through that change.
I had a not dissimilar journey. I'll jump in there. And back in my first business, which was in exec search and technology contracting business, Potentia, and the first kind of 4 people that I brought in that were revenue generating, I put in place a commission-only model and then scaled it based upon that. And then about maybe 3 or 4 years down the path, that team had multiplied by maybe 600% in terms of its scale. And there was all these people that were sitting there that were supposed to be revenue generating that were taking a really good chunk of the revenue. But the reality was most of them were just getting leads. And so they were sitting there kind of, getting a really good share of the income, but they weren't generating that business from themselves. So I went through a similar kind of journey, and we had it was a 3-month process to go through the consultation, the advice, what we were intending to do, and what we brought them on with the intention to do, and what the actual reality of their role was. We ended up having 0 fallout, and only one of those folk ultimately went out and successfully did their own thing. So there was a lot of talk from people, but I bring that up into the story now because you mentioned that your guys who were the licensee model, franchise model, slightly different from a commercial structure, but you still want someone who's independent and motivated and who's able to go out and grow their own business. So it sounds like you did have people that were able to do that, and some of them ultimately went on to do that successfully outside of 150 Group.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's good to see. I mean, in hindsight, at the time it was challenging and stressful times, but when you're losing good people, and you especially when you train them from scratch and stuff. But it's good to look back on now. We shared a lot of really good times there, and I think that's something you can be proud of as a business owner to have brought people into the industry, and now they're competing. Well, they're succeeding in what they do, which is great. So but definitely a bit of disruption through that stage, and that was also leading into that COVID-esque area as well too, right?
Okay, got it. So with that sort of time frame, understood. I'm going to jump into something here because you brought up the recruitment term, and what I'm hearing you say, Greg, is that you had a series of products and offerings which enabled you to get a greater share of wallet, which is a technology term, but ultimately sell things of more value to the same client base. And so you kind of had to have a sales machine that enabled all of those things to work properly. Is that a fair kind of description?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, cool.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Albeit that sales is a nasty word in financial services, right? It's advice.
Okay, cool. So you had an advice machine. And so therefore, you need to make sure that you're bringing in a regular pool of talent with the knowledge. And I'm curious as to what your success ratio was. So you mentioned the recruitment term. So how did you go about making that recruitment thing work for you? What were some of the approaches, the processes that you had to make sure that you were bringing on the right people, and that consequently the failure rate or the success rate was high, the failure rate was low?
Yeah, I don't think we, think of all the failures you've had over the years, but look, there's a bunch of successes too. I think in the early days of the business, there was a whole lot less regulation, so it was easier to get somebody in from outside of the industry. Nowadays, there's a whole lot more compliance. There's level 5 qualifications required and so on. But in the early days, as I say, like recruitment, I could recruit somebody who was just a good human who had a good network or had the ability to pick up the phone, and you wanted people.
Yeah.
And products are product. I didn't know about mortgages. I didn't know about insurances, accounting, whatever, back in the day, but you quickly learn it.
McKinsey have a quadrant, and it's the will skill quadrant. So motivation and capability is essentially what you're mapping out. And obviously the ideal place to be is high will and high skill. So top right corner, as you always want to be with most quadrants. And so the worst place you want to be is low skill and no will. But would you recruit more for people that had what you believed to be innate motivation, or people that had capability? What was your preference and why?
Preference was always somebody who wanted to go somewhere, right? I've been a hugely goal-driven person all my life, and that comes down to early Tim Ferriss days of, have to be what, where do you want to get to? How do we get you there? Break it down to annual income, monthly income, target weekly activity, target daily activity, and so on. So, you use those in everything. So in the early days of business, I think sub 20 staff. At the peak, we got to about 65. But sub 20, even 25-ish, I was still doing weekly meetings with all of my people. And so it didn't matter whether it was the new person coming in at reception or one of our advisors or a senior person. It was, day one, what do? You sit down with Greg. He helps you plan some goals. And so that was something that has worked really well over the years, because if you can motivate people, or understand what motivates people, some people it might be their health and wellness, some people might be time with the family, some people might be outright capitalism, and in which case, if you understand what drives people, then you can link what they need to do on a daily in order to to get those outcomes. They want to spend more time with the family. What does that mean? It means they need to have X amount of income. It means they need to have X amount of appointments. It means they need to go on the X holiday. Which, break all of those things down. And if you can show people a pathway, and then you can hold them accountable to what their daily, weekly, monthly actions are, that was something that quickly determined success and failure of somebody. If everybody would come in and they'd talk a big game and set some goals, but who would actually follow through with the activity? Within a month or two, if somebody's actually prepared to do what is required for them to succeed.
Yeah.
So that's
similar experience, actually, especially in a sales capacity. It's often been said that a salesperson's best-selling job is the one that they do in the interview. And so what I'm hearing you say, and I really like this, is that you got really clear on what their objective was. So what it was that a successful kind of engagement would look like for them, money, time with family, freedom, holidays, whatever it might be. So you anchored the intention for them, and then reverse engineered it back into a sales methodology. So in other words, if you've told me you want to make, let's call it $250,000 a year, therefore you need to sell 25 products. I'm making that up, obviously. And so therefore you need to go out and have 50 sales calls to make 25, because we sell 1 and 2. Therefore you need to open up 200 opportunities. Is that kind of the way that you went about doing things? So you reverse it? Yeah, cool. Okay, great.
Break it down to people wanting to buy the new car, the new house, go on the family holiday, lose X amount of weight, do these things, because once again, I think physical health, strong body, strong mind, ability to push through the tough times. So building a culture around people wanting to go places.
And you talked about keeping people accountable, and I think that in the world that we live in, I think that kind of maintaining an accountability mindset and culture has changed, and I think for the worse over the last 20 years. So how did you go about doing that? What was the approach that you took to keep people accountable to things?
I think I'm a bit more PC nowadays, because you have to be, which is exactly the point you're making. Great question. I think the fact that, each of those meetings I had with my team, the structure of that, because I think structure is everything. You fall back to your systems. So during the meeting, I would be emailing them, I'd be emailing myself, and it was just a constant flow of what we said last week, what we're going to do, and so on and so forth. So very quickly, you get to the accountability.
Apologies for the interruption, and thanks for listening to the show. These shows take resources to build and put together. We have a team of producers, we have some promoters behind the scenes, and of course we have the guests that generously give their time to come on the show. My only ask of you is that you go and check out my website. I advise founders on how to build value and how to navigate the exit process successfully. We have a diagnostic on the website. There's an ebook that I've written. There's a free chapter of my upcoming book, Wantrepreneur, on there. So I'd just urge you to take a couple of minutes and go and check out joshcomrie.com. Is that still the way you approach it? And while you're thinking about that, I was speaking on a panel somewhere, and one of my investee companies, Comrie, which had a very public, hugely successful exit last year, we had Bob Drummond on the panel, and he gave the COVID story, which is when their business absolutely blew up in a positive way. The revenue kind of recollection is at 5x'd over the course of about 18 months or so from a reasonably good base. And so the company went ballistic. And he had this super simplistic way of explaining how they went through the growth. It was obviously more painful inside the business, but it was one of the founders or one of the early employees, when they had more work that would come in, they would do that job. So they'd stack themselves up, right? A lot of pressure for those folk, obviously, but founding a business is not easy, right? If anyone tells you it's easy, then they've never done it before. And so they'd stack the responsibility on themselves. And then the first thing that they would do once they got overwhelmed was to go, okay, how do we processize, how do we systemize this thing and either automate or offshore? So those were the first two questions. Automate was the absolute preference. If that's not possible to build ourselves, software development company, then we'd buy something off the shelf. They ultimately ended up doing more of the buy off the shelf. And then it was a bit of offshoring. And then if neither of those two things were possible, then they would hire another human being. I think in services companies, the mentality that we can often have is to go, we're overwhelmed, let's hire another human being. And the conversations I'm having with all the organizations that I work with today is, no, we need to be looking at every single role, every single opportunity, because automation's come so far, so quickly, just the last couple of years. I talk about automation. What I'm meaning is AI, because a lot of it is just automation, right?
Absolutely.
And it becomes less intimidating when you think about automation than AI. What was your mindset over that time frame, and has it changed much since then?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, huge changes. AI space, you just wouldn't build that company in that same way now. And I think even if I was starting a new company in the same industry today, I think you'd have a huge advantage coming from the background of knowing how we've done things so manually over the years to now implementing AI, starting with a fresh base without the historic systems and processes that are currently being used, be a massive opportunity. So it's kind of something I don't know. It's almost rude not to jump back in and have another crack at it, just with the benefit of new technology.
So let's go back and talk about what you mentioned earlier, some of the mistakes. What were some of the big clangers that you made along the way when you were building the 150 Group?
In hindsight, probably nothing. Well, obviously nothing that's been a major. I think just learnings that you take in hindsight, things you would do better next time. One, I think in relation to the exit more than anything, just culture. Culture is obviously a massive thing, and it's one that I think every business owner struggles with, or leadership team, when you're trying to set a culture within a business, because post-COVID, you're starting to get people back into the office, and those were crazy times, right? The world shut down. None of us knew what was going on. We're all just running for our homes and our supermarkets, trying to load up on our crazy times. And so how do you operate a business in that environment? And then how do you recover from that and then once again build culture? And we often did blind surveys. And so we did a blind survey on culture post-COVID. Surprise, surprise. What are we unhappy about? We don't like the culture. Do we want to come into the office? No. How do you deal with those things? So, I mean, hey, in hindsight, there was things we should have done better from a cultural perspective. There wasn't really any catastrophic errors that we made in the business. Obviously, all the different skips we went along the way, the different directions we took when we learnt something new. I guess the fun thing about a smaller business was the agility, ability to have read a pod or read a book on the weekend, implement on Monday morning, fast change. But that's also dangerous too, isn't it? You go away to a conference, you hear what somebody else is doing, all of a sudden you're sidetracked. And I'd say fundamentally nothing significant. Definitely lost a lot of, I guess, productivity or value along the way just through investing in systems or processes, trying to self-build things. You should more often than not go off the shelf, just because chances are there's somebody in the world who's done this before and you're not the first one to this market. So why don't you just replicate what happens better internationally and so on. So, investments in a bit of software. I think one of the key things we did well over time was isolating the different aspects of the business and pairing the right personality or the right people to put into the slots. And the example being, if we strip it back to, let's say, the mortgage broking business, you'd have somebody who's really good at being out there, talking to the people front line, and that's a completely different skill set, or prospecting even, or looking for leads, building relationships with real estate agents, property developers and the like, versus somebody who's actually really good at data and processing. So stripping those two out, obvious ones, right? Typically a high revenue generation person, there's no better thing that they can be doing than being out there talking to somebody. So anything that you can do to take away some of those things that we're not good at, and I think that's that classic schooling thing too, isn't it? At school, you're taught to focus on your weaknesses, whereas if we just focused on our strengths, we'd be so much better. It's like the conversation I have with my wife around the gardening. She loves her gardening. I hate gardening. I say to her all the time, hey, happy to hire you a gardener to go out gardening with you, but you won't find me there because I'd be better off being inside doing some work and generating some revenue, and I can
do what you love. There's a story that I know a friend that was calling on Jim's lawn mowing, the incredibly successful Australian-based franchise for lawn mowing and gardening and that sort of stuff. And he was, going through the sales process, and he said, I'd really like to, as he walked in, he said he saw this old guy that was tending the roses. There was a beautiful rose garden out the front. And he's inside, having the conversation with the COO, and said, I'd really like to meet Jim along the way. And they said, he's actually outside. And he said, what, the old guy doing the garden? And they said, yeah, well, what's he doing that for? He's got all the money in the world. And they said, well, he actually loves nothing more than to do the gardening. It's the old parable of the Mexican fisherman, and then the investment banker meets him, and you could buy multiple boats so you could go out and then ultimately spend your time fishing for the family. So being clear about what you want. But I do like that mentality of going, what is it that people excel at? And then let's enable them to do more of that inside the business that enables us to achieve our objectives as well. I really like that. So let's go and talk about the exit process. So we've come through COVID. The business is 10, 12 years old, kind of roundabout now.
10 years old.
You had a board in place? You had Richard on your board, or was he in an advisory capacity?
Richard was there. We'd have our monthly meetings. He'd come up from Blenheim or would go down. So that structure was going well, and he was always helping us to build to exit. Richard, and something I really agree with him, is business is fun until you get to about 20 staff. And then above that, at our peak we were 65, and just roles change, I think, recognition of that. But why
was that the case for you? I've got my own narrative around that, but I'm curious as to why that was the case for you.
I think the key thing in hindsight, you look back, is business needs change. So as an immature business owner back in the day, not recognising these things, you go from small team, goal setters, going places, then you've got levels of infrastructure. I think it's about 30-ish. You almost need a couple of those little mid-level managers. Your relationships start to distance, and you need different people in there. In the early days, I would have been spending 50% of my time on the business and 50% of the time in the business, the classic 80-hour work week, and did that for many, many years. But then that changes to, at the end, far out, you got 65 staff, typically 10% of them are having a bad day. You're dealing with 6 or 7 problem children each day, week.
That's most of your day gone.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it really is true there, as far as some of the people who I see excel in business, they stick to their thing and they outsource. Even I can think of a number of people locally and internationally that kept doing their bit, and they hired the management team to do that bit. So, as a typical small business owner in New Zealand, we have to do everything ourselves from the outset. We struggle to let go. We're across everything too much. And whereas what we should do is take a more structured approach, do the bit that we do the best, outsource the rest. And if that means dropping your ego and getting somebody in there to actually manage your team, then that's probably something that, in hindsight, that would have probably helped a lot more in my business.
it's such a touchstone in New Zealand, especially for services companies. People ask, how's your business going? And then the next question tends to be, so how big is it these days? And we refer to headcount as opposed to revenue because we're Kiwi, so we don't like talking about money typically. And headcount tends to be the next touchstone. And it's such a misnomer. I had Janine Granger on the show and coming out this week, tomorrow. And she was talking about the touchstone around funds that have been raised for startups and how that tends to be something that we celebrate, which is such a false metric because there's no exit that's attached to that thing. People have parted with money, 12 million promises, kind of thing. And so in this instance, it's the same sort of thing. Like, who's to say just because your business has gone from 20 people to 40 people that it's twice as successful? Often it's not, right? Because you've increased the cost base by probably more than double because those first 20 people were probably a lot of individual contributors. And the next 20 people, there's probably 5 managers in there, right? And managers are a nightmare, just between you and I and everyone listening. But it's such a false touchstone for us to have around the scale of the business. So go.
Something Richard did well for us was those base metrics. So now that we understood what our value is, our key metrics, our KPIs we're reporting on was what our annual recurring revenue looks like, number of clients, and the number of clients in the different areas, because each of those across those 5 different individual businesses had different value metrics. And one of the most important things which we didn't know, but it led to the sale we got at the number we got, was the relationship between those businesses. I mean, everybody always knows cross-selling or selling to your same client base, adding another product on is the absolute golden egg, and we did that really, really well. We had a really good sales-based system, which used to be my conversation. I turned that into a paper-based form. I turned it into an iPad form, and then we turned it into an online digital version. But it was the sales journey, and our sales journey meant we'd get one lead for one of our businesses in the top of our pipeline, and we'd split it into 3.2 average leads to our other out of our 5 businesses. So for every one in, times 3.2 opportunities, and that then fueled that machine. And so those were the kind of metrics that we did measure well, knowing, because once again, headcount, false metric. The larger you are, the more noise you have. But at least we knew what our value metrics were, and we were tracking those. So even when, I guess in that mid stage of the company, 5, 6, 7 years in, we're doing really well, cash flow wise, doing really well. And then you go down, we completely change tack. We go from this self-employed contractor model, albeit with a bunch of salaried staff to support, to everybody's an employee. And then when you got 65 salaries and COVID hits and you kind of wonder where your revenue's coming from, interesting times, stressful times, but tracking those monthly metrics on what we actually knew would deliver us a valuable outcome. That was important. So that was one of the really good things that Richard brought into us, which was just that monthly reporting and tracking your actual numbers, because your cash flow, we went through months of losing money and probably when we sold, net numbers, bottom line would have been probably net zero or maybe a few $100,000 positive. Yet we sold for a really good figure, which was a multiplier of normalized EBIT. Tell us more. Yeah, well, hey, look, each of those different businesses, so 5 different businesses, all valued in a different way.
Accounting, insurance, mortgage broking.
Mortgage broking, KiwiSaver investment advice, so investment book. So what do we have? So mortgage business, life insurance business, fire and general insurance, KiwiSaver accounting, dollar for dollar. If you've got $1 million worth of fees, you're basically worth $1 million. Each of these other businesses are sold on a multiplier of what their passive revenue income stream is. But then you've got nuances, because with a mortgage business, some of it can be a really good, strong cash flow business, and depending on where you're placing your loans will depend on the size of your passive revenue book. Bunch of different things, but long story short, because we got to a certain scale and we didn't sell on a multiplier, like this one might be sold for 2 times, this one might be sold for 5 times, this one 1 times, we actually managed to get outside of those industry norms because of the scale, and we managed to sell at an EBIT model, and that was once again because of who the buyer was. The buyer was a group larger than us. I think collectively when we joined, we had about 185 staff between the 2 businesses. But revenue-wise, they were a big, old, mature business that was focused on paying out their quarterly dividends to shareholders, because their shareholder base was vast. maybe 150 odd shareholders across the group from various acquisitions over the years, from staff ESOPs over the years, and also some institutional investment. And so they were focused on, obviously, an EBIT, needing to return to shareholders. So our business had a couple of parts to it which theirs didn't, being the fire and general insurance, and then also the accounting businesses. They didn't have those, but it's a natural fit with that collective of clients, right?
So each business valued differently based upon trailing revenue, recurring revenue, and maybe top-line revenue as well. But then you had the EBIT multiple, which is what you're able to get applied to the group. But you mentioned that the business didn't make a profit in the last year.
Oh, probably we might have made a few $100,000 or something, but insignificant in the sale price. So we sold, and that was just because of what we were doing. Every time I got $1 in, every time I had surplus funds, we would hire a new human to stack some more clients on, because services-based business, right? Your products are your people, and your ability for your people to pick up more clients, build a client base, and so on. So a classic example would be like the KiwiSaver business, right? It's a low revenue but good long tail. So they are good, valuable businesses, because arguably, if you get a KiwiSaver client on board, they might be with you for 30, 40 years, right, unless they got encouraged to switch somewhere else, right? So it's a good business, but negative cash flow, right? Hire a human. When you start that business, you can hire a person, train them up, and maybe at the end of the year you might have replaced half of the income that you've paid that person. But then year 2, you've got that revenue, and you stack another lot of revenue on top. So you're constantly building this book. So anytime we got any sort of growth in our business and we had surplus cash flow, that meant we had surplus cash flow. We could hire another staff member to then scale what we were doing successfully. So we went through mid-stage in the business, cash flow, then all of a sudden we realised what our true value was, and so we focused every dollar we possibly could on building that value, knowing that we would get an exit. And so we went from focusing on really good cash flow and good quarterly dividends to ourselves as shareholders to let's put every dollar we can back into reinvestment in people and systems and processes in order to build the deep value which we would eventually sell. Yeah, got it. Okay. And so to what extent did the acquirer kind of delve in to see those things, and then how did they value those things? Yeah, they to their credit, had a really good understanding, obviously, of the business. They'd been in it, 30 plus years collectively. They had a good leadership team in there, and so on. So they understood the fundamentals of what it took to run a larger business. Our business, we literally had our actual P&Ls. They obviously had access to everything, all of our accounts through the DD, but it was about saying, right, well, these are our numbers that we're showing. However, look at stripping out all of the growth costs. So what would it actually take? And that was always the way. The thing in the back of my mind when we're making this investment and you're doing it tough for a few years cash flow wise is, hey, at any stage we could turn off the growth tap and our bottom line will return, but that wasn't the focus. So while that tap was on, the growth tap was on, it was every spare dollar was ploughed into reinvestment. Turn off that tap. Stop. If you right-sized your business at any stage, great. You got a 7-figure bottom line again. So to be clear, what you did is that you identified the growth costs that were attached to the business, and then kind of clearly delineated those things for the acquirer, so that they could see that immediately there'd be another $1 million, whatever the number might be, added to the bottom line. Absolutely. Should you decide to not be growing, what kind of percentage points were you growing at per year approximately? Good, actually. Sorry, double figures. It's been. Yeah, it's been double digits. Yeah, definitely double digits. Yeah, okay. Especially in those last years, the actual value leaps were very significant over the last sort of 3 or 4 years. Yeah. But literally that we stripped out what were the growth costs, so we actually sold on a normalised EBIT, which was the right way to look at it, because otherwise what we would have had to do if we really wanted to prepare for a sale would have been turn off the growth tap, allow that business to cash flow recover or right size. What does that mean? Strip out some of the people costs that we had, which were focused on growth. So stressful times, especially through that COVID period and
Is that the thing that ultimately got you to the stage of going, perhaps now is the time for me to look at selling this thing? 65 staff, come through a difficult phase. You'd been building to get to an exit. Richard was probably whispering in your ear about something or other. So, yeah, is that the catalyst for you?
What was the catalyst? I think I just done my time. It was almost like with that first business, I woke up one day and decided to sell and was gone within a month, right? There was definitely a few tough years there, right? COVID just shook things up. Then we had the restructure of our business model, which meant we had some of our key team leave. COVID, you muscle your way through that, and I think it was just time.
Yeah. I don't think it's talked about often enough is the founder energy of and for the business, because it's such an important determinant to get the thing out of the ground. And the energy is kind of self-perpetuating often in the early days. But when you face external, even internal factors, life change, divorce, death of a family member, something tragic like that, that can go on, that can distract you from achieving the business objectives. But also you get to a certain point in your life and you're kind of like, I'm doing the same thing over and over again, or I'm no longer deriving satisfaction from this thing because my job is not what it was when we were a much, much smaller business. And so I don't think it's talked about often enough as being really, really clear and present to what your level of kind of satisfaction as a founder, as a company owner is, and having that as one of your metrics that you kind of, honestly talk to yourself about. Because otherwise, I've met so many founders who are at the stage of going, I hate my business. I really do not like it anymore. And how they show up in that business is it's terrible. It's terrible. But they feel like, because of the whole identity attachment piece, they feel like it's a part of them. It's an extension of who they are. And so they feel like they're beholden to it. And so they go through the motions, but they're really not enjoying their job, because their job is 80-90% of the time that they're dedicated to that business. The entrepreneur part or the director part is 5 to 10% of the business. So really you are what the job that you've created for yourself. And often, hopefully that's maybe, CRO, or maybe that's CSO, Chief Strategy Officer, or something that you really, really enjoy. But often for people, I find that they're doing the real shitty drudgery jobs around the place, and they despise that thing that they've created for themselves, but don't have the awareness to step back from it. So good on you for having the awareness is what I'm leading to there.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if it was really planned that way, but hey, in hindsight, now looking back, I mean, hey, we've all got these lessons, don't we, as far as things we should have done differently. HR is definitely a challenge at any company that I think is 50 plus staff. I think you're always going to have your challenges, and it takes a different kind of person. If you're hugely, I'm an eternal optimist. I'm always focused on the next sort of growth and the opportunity and whatnot. And when you get dragged down into a lot of that HR stuff, it's just takes the fun out of it, doesn't it?
Yeah,
so,
I understand.
That's something
agree.
I definitely do differently next time. Let's have a chief people officer, or if you get something to scale.
Yeah, right. You mentioned before we sat down today that eternal optimist, and yet when you did sell the business, you went through a bit of a funk. Tell us about what happened there.
It sounds like, listening to your podcast, that everybody goes through the lack of identity or lost identity, isn't it? It's I tell you, the thing that really made it obvious for me was, 3 years on from exiting the business, and you'd meet somebody and, a conversation would come up about work. I normally nowadays sort of say to people you meet at a barbecue, so what do you do for fun? Because I don't want to talk about work, arguably. And but when it inevitably leads to a conversation about career, what do you do? And for 3 years I found myself saying, I used to own a financial services business, 65 staff and whatnot. It's like, oh, okay. So what do you do now? And it's kind of, so there was, obviously.
What did you be like? Can I get you another beer or kind of thing?
Change the subject. So I think that's quite a common thing, right? For many years you've had a huge amount of your wealth tied to this thing. So majority of your wealth is tied up in this hugely valuable thing you've built, your identity. It's what you do. I did 20 years of 80-hour weeks. My older kids didn't see me in the morning. They very rarely saw me. I'd duck home for dinner, and I'd shoot back out to evening appointments, and that's what you did. And then all of a sudden, definitely a big culture shock when you exit. So.
one of the things that people talk about is it's not just the fact that you used to own a financial services company, but it's the ecosystem that you've got tied up in and around your business. There's a coffee guy that you see in the morning. There's a place that you go to for parking. There's the lunch place that you go to, one of 3 places that you'll visit. And so it's the routine and the habits that you have attached to work, which also go. And then rebuilding those things can be quite challenging, and going, not just what does it all mean, but avoiding the isms, as a good friend of mine said once, because you can go into narcissism, alcoholism, drugism, exercisism. These things can quite easily crop up for people because you're trying to fill a gigantic space that occupied your life, and it was a huge part of your life. So you've got a charity.
Yeah, that's right.
Tell us more about the Happiness
just recently
Project.
kicked off another version of it. So long story short, it's been about 12 years ago we first kicked off a charity whereby we provide events for children who have been affected by illness or disability. So the trust deed was built around ages 5 to 21, affected by illness or disability. And that means everything from the obvious things like heart and cancer and so on, right through to things like cerebral palsy. And so basically the idea being it started really as a really good culture building thing within the business, because I think we all take for granted our health, the fact that we have, majority of us have a normal day-to-day life whereby we go to work, we go home, we spend some time with our kids and so on. But there's thousands of families out there that are affected who have, they're living in maybe in a situation whereby they're earning average household income. B, they have a sick kid who is in and out of hospital, which means one parent is they're down to a single family, single income family. And how do those people, I guess for us, lucky ones, touch wood, opportunity to do something and share some joy for a small amount of time for some of these people. So really proud that the charity, the second one I set up was called Dream Days, and I actually handed that on to the people who bought our business. It was a part of a culture thing that we had with work, which was we would organise these events. We would call on members of the public, everybody from All Blacks, Warriors. I had John Key when he was Prime Minister, people like the Mowbray family have always supported us to do these amazing events whereby we take a family out. We custom tailor a day. Child's into rugby, they're into X, Y, Z. We try and tailor it to deliver some absolute joy for that family. It's done as a surprise for the kids normally, and we take them out. We pick them up in supercars. We take them out in helicopters. We call on members of the public to put together the day that is going to be meaningful for that family. And so, we've completed over 140 of those events in the last 12 years, thanks to the support we've had from all of the people that used to work for my company and still do. That charity is still going in its same form as I left it, which is great. And then I've kicked off a new project called the Happiness Project. We just done our first event 2 weeks ago for a lovely family, young Patrick, 17 years old, major heart challenges. We managed to get on a friend's helicopter out to his farm, do some claybird shooting, supercars, and Chris Mack from 660 joined us, and the musical family. So managed to get Patrick a jam session with Chris from 660 in his bar in Morningside there. So 605 Drinkery, get along there if you get the chance.
Good plug. I love it.
So that's something that's been a passion project, something I get my kids involved in. My son comes out and drives one of our cars and whatnot and gets involved with those. So just an opportunity to give back, and something that we can all take a little bit of time out and do these things. It means so much to those families going through those times. So
why is this important to you, Greg?
I think just seeing the joy, the relationships we've built over the years. At the end of those days, we have families that have had some really challenging times. They're also always often tearful, thank yous at the end of the day. It's just really good to see these people getting these opportunities to do these things, which we really work hard to try and make them very special for them as a family. Often it's definitely always including the siblings, but often the siblings get missed out on these things as well, whereby, you've got a child who might be going through a medical condition for 5, 6, 10 years or all of their life, and the other siblings are also affected just because time with mum and dad and so on. So, those things are, it's just a meaningful thing we can do, right?
Mm-hmm. You mentioned you're a reader and a consumer of courses and that sort of stuff. Have you, the old school stuff, Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich, Master Key to Riches, are those books that you've consumed over time?
I've consumed so many books. I was doing an audio book a week between my, when I'm working out, when I'm driving.
Yes.
Spend a lot of time in the cars. Classic old school Anthony Robbins.
Yeah,
box,
love Tony Robbins.
Box set,
the box set CDs.
cassette,
Still got the CDs.
Oh,
yeah.
amazing. So, that was where it all started back in the days.
Yeah.
And right through to things, obviously now podcasts. I love listening to your podcast, hearing what other business founders have done and all of those sorts of things. So there's so many learnings out there that are available to all of us.
I bring Napoleon Hill up specifically because in one of those two books, I think it was The Master Key to Riches, one of his 7 principles is the principle of giving. And so you can't expect to receive unless you first give. And so it's based upon the principles of some religious kind of tropes in behind it as well. Tithing has some connotations attached to it these days because some of these mega churches perhaps utilise the money for themselves. It doesn't go to God, but that's a different conversation. But for me, I leaned into the space of giving because I thought that it was the right thing to do attached to a success principle. But over time, I understood that there's a lot of joy that can be attached to enabling someone else to have an experience that they wouldn't have had otherwise, giving something to someone who's in need that you don't have need. Trent Mankalo, who was on the show last week, he just put a post on LinkedIn about a degree of your success will have been luck. It has to have been, right? The harder I work, the luckier I get. Absolutely, totally. But sometimes there's just a small amount, and sometimes you'll get that luck, and sometimes you won't get that luck. And so the cost attached to that luck is that you therefore need to give something later. And so there's like an obligation aspect to it. So there's the joy, the innate joy that you get. There's the responsibility that you have, but also there's the attachment to success. It's funny because not everyone has the same mentality around sharing what you've been able to achieve and what you've been given the gift of getting in life too. So thank you for your work that you're doing in and around this charity. A funny story, one of the charities that I did something with, it was Kids in Cars.
Yeah, great.
And it was, we're both car people, and I had a particular car. It was a silly car, convertible thing, and we went out to Pukekohe racetrack, and they had basically no guidelines around what you're doing. So we're doing burnouts on the track and, doing 190 down the back straight with these kids screaming hares, going wild, having the time of their lives. And I thought at one stage, this is a little bit risky. Nobody's got a helmet on. We're just going to go and hell for leather. It was a very, very relaxed day. Yeah. I don't think that charity exists anymore. They were attached to the Targa group, so that was one of their charities of choice. I wanted to... Sorry, you're going to say?
Yeah, just on that giving side of things, I think all of us in business especially always get hit up for financial contributions. And the thing for me is I want to give back. I want to do my piece. Writing a check is just... I don't know. Yes, it might help in some way, but it doesn't feel like you're actually doing anything. Participation. So all of the people that I get to, be a part of these things, when they actually meet these families and meet the kids, like if it's getting some mates out in supercars or going to somebody's boat or whatever, the people always afterwards that are involved in that day or as volunteers are also very grateful. So, yeah, excuse me, challenge any of your listeners to get in touch if they do feel like they want to get involved in something like that, because it is a very meaningful thing, so even as a family,
I wanted to jump back to the part of the deal was that you took some equity in the venture that you were acquired by.
Sure.
And they have an interesting kind of trading mechanism whereby you have like a weekly open kind of market for them. Talk us through how that works, because that's something that I've not heard of before.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that business was an accumulation of a number of different businesses in that financial services world that I guess collectively were rolled up over time and acquired. And so that their acquisitions are sometimes cash, sometimes shares. And in our instance, it was a lump of cash and a lump of shares. And but yeah, as a business, I think they might have 150 odd different shareholders. A lot of those are Might be retirees who used to be in the financial services businesses who have sort of rolled up their company as a part of it over the years, or ex-ESOP, or and a bit of institutional funding in there too, or shareholders in there. But literally, there's I think they probably still have it to this day. I'm no longer a shareholder. I've cashed out a while ago after I exited. Literally a weekly share trading. So you've got share offers of buyers and sells that is distributed on a weekly basis. Every Friday afternoon you get an email out of people wanting to sell or buy and what their sell price would be. So if you know what the general market for the shares are trading at, and so that was a really good mechanism for those people, just to provide some liquidity when people wanted it, and if people did need to sell out, then there was an open market to do that, albeit it's a private company, right?
Yeah, that's really interesting.
I'm an investee in a company called Catalyst who sort of instigates a lot of that stuff nowadays too, right? Deals with a lot of the angel groups, and Catalyst now provides, I guess, a really good platform to do that openly and honestly. So
yeah. We through Flying Kiwi Angels about 6 months ago, we decided to attach ourselves to Catalyst, and I think we were the first of the angel groups to do so, with the idea being that we hope that may standardise the approach in New Zealand, because one of the things that we're a do-it-yourself nation, and one of the downsides of that is that everyone decides they're going to build their own platform, and sometimes there's a lot of power to be had through having a centralised kind of approach to something. So we've talked about sales, we've talked about culture, we've talked about building businesses, we've talked about charitable giving. Is there any subject that we haven't touched on, Greg?
Oh, I think that's probably I'll tell you one thing we didn't touch on with sales was a strategy that I used over the years, which is just a way of changing your thinking. It's almost like the 10x thinking, but what else should you be offering your client base, or what is your next growth opportunity within your business? And so I always frame that anytime I do a little bit of advisory stuff with friends and clients over the years and who are in business. And one of the things you try and get them to do is say, right, if you had to deal with the same clients, you had the same sales process, same distribution, same operational kind of infrastructure, but you made $0 from your current activities, how would you generate revenue? And it's just a question where if you can actually take a step back and think, right, okay, I'm dealing with the same people, I'm fundamentally same process systems, whatever, and it just forces you to think about what else you should be offering that. Because, we all look at, especially in a sales or growth-based business, it's all about acquiring clients. There's no cheaper client to acquire than the one you already have. They've already got a relationship. For us, we always used to get you're a one-stop shop. Yeah, absolutely, we're a one-stop shop. We'll acquire you once. We'll provide this other service and this other service. And so that's just something that's always been, if I can give a little bit of value to the listeners, if you're in business and you're thinking about where to next, then using that question to guide yourself on what else you could be offering your existing clientele, because they love you, you've got a relationship with you, they value your opinion and whatever it is. What else could you do with them?
Yeah, I love that. One of the things that I do with organisations is help them get back to growth or accelerate their growth. And a part of that conversation is always, let's talk through your account planning process. So the incumbent, 80-20 rule, 20% of your number of accounts will be giving you 80% of your revenue. And so what's your plan to expand that? Because they're already giving you a bunch. There's probably more that you can kind of get from that relationship and more you can deliver to them. And so it galls me how few organisations actually have a structured account planning process. That just drives me balmy. Big global tech firms, they do that incredibly well. There's so many things that happen from tech because there's so many bright minds that have gone to it over the last 20 years because of the outsized returns that are available. So account planning is just a standard thing, it's part of the process. But for SMBs in New Zealand, the 10 to 100 staff, they're not that great at kind of going, how could we derive more and give more to the incumbent set of clients that we're working with? So I love that line of thinking. Greg, very generous with your time today. Many, many insights that you've shared. You expressed some imposter syndrome coming into the room. I can assure you that when you go back and listen to this, you'll appreciate there's a lot of stuff that is hugely valuable for people that's in this episode. So on behalf of those folk, thank you very much for your time today.
Excellent. Thanks for the opportunity.
Cheers, Greg.
Thanks.
If you enjoy these episodes, I hope you do. I love filming them, and the guests always say what a great and often cathartic experience it is for them. Then please do like and share. Hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm open to connect requests, and occasionally get emails from people as well asking me about my experience around certain subjects. So please do like and share and continue to follow the show. I really appreciate your ears.